My name is Dalal. I am a current student at Kellogg. I'm an entrepreneur, and I am a retired moderator at the GMAT Club. I'm here to welcome you to GMAT Club's MBA application walkthroughs, which is a 6-week series of videos covering applications to top 25 MBA programs. So every Thursday and Friday for the next 6 weeks, we will feature admissions experts and admissions teams going step by step through every aspect of the application. Be sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated and support us in organizing more events. Okay, I'll be your host today in today's walkthrough, and we are covering Harvard Business School's application. I am so excited to welcome Maria today with us. She is the ultimate Harvard admissions expert on GMAT Club and in the world of MBA applications. Maria is a Harvard alum, and she's a founder of a very popular application tool called Applicant Lab, which you probably are using, you've heard of, and if you haven't, you're probably going to hear about it a lot today. So she has helped literally thousands of people get into business school and is more than qualified to provide insights on the application process. Welcome, Maria. It is such a great pleasure to have you today. This is my second walkthrough with you. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Okay, so why don't we're just going to jump right in, I think, right? So I'm going
I
to
think
share
so
my
too.
screen. All right, so can you see my screen?
I will let you know when we do. So we're going to share, yes, the Harvard Business School application screen. We're going to go over it step.
Oh, step by step. I don't know if she froze for me. I don't know if you if maybe I'm the one who's frozen. You never know with these things, right? But Dalal, you are frozen on my side at least. So I'm just going to start talking. Talking. It's something it's for better or worse, it's something that I enjoy doing. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go really kind of step by step through the HBS application. Every school is going to have an application form, obviously. And a lot of these application forms are going to be very similar. But I think what we're going to get to a little bit later is that the HBS application form is particularly important because, spoiler alert, their essay question basically says, and I'm going to paraphrase it here, but their essay question is basically saying, we've read everything else in this application up until this point. What else should we know? That's the essay question, very open-ended. Therefore, because the admissions committee is literally signaling to you, they're not being shy about it or tricky or sneaky. Like they are literally saying like, hey, we are reading everything else. What else should we know? As opposed to for other schools where, yes, of course, they're going to read the whole application, but the difference is that those other pieces are not expected. The admissions committee is not saying to you, we expect all of these pieces to fit together like a very nice, well-oiled machine. And so for that reason, you have to be a little bit more thoughtful in what you put in your HBS application versus what you put for other schools. Only because as you go through this process, you have to keep in mind that what you do or do not say in other places of the application, if there's something you do want to say, you have to think about like, oh, well, if I don't put it here, then it has to go into the essay. Or conversely, I already put it someplace else, so that means I don't have to put it in the in the essay. Hooray! So with that kind of little introduction out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So what I've done is I have logged into the application form and I've pulled open the application. I figured you guys didn't need to see that step. Okay, so this first page, it just sort of says read this first. There's a little video here. I don't think you have to watch the video. I mean, you can if you've got, if you're sort of looking for something a way to waste your time. There's really nothing. There's really, I mean, God bless him for putting this video, but there's really nothing important in here. So one thing that I did want to draw everyone's attention to, though, is sign up for application help sessions. So they actually, before the round deadline, you can actually sign up were little help sessions with their admissions committee. Now, I would advise strongly that you not just show up to one of these sessions completely blind and ask questions like, what do I put in the name box? Do I put my name or do I put the name I wish I had? Like, I would advise you, if you are going to take advantage of this resource that they're offering you, that you show up with thoughtful questions. But this is a nice little thing that HBS has started doing in the past year or two, which I think is like a really, it's really nice, because I think for years within the universe of MBA schools, HBS was sort of the, or at least perceived to be, one of the least friendly, one of the most kind of like black box. You know, we are not going to reveal any of our secrets. We're very tight-lipped. We are not, out there telling everyone a whole lot of information. And so I think I think they've been getting that feedback from applicants. And so I think that little things like this are ways for them to start to be like, no, we're actually really friendly. We're just super busy, but we're really friendly. So just as a heads up, don't sign up for them right now, because right now you need to be looking at this video. But at some point, realize that about a month before each deadline, they are having these sessions that you can sign up for. Moving on, notice that there are only 2 rounds for HBS, not 3 or 4 or more. So what do I mean by a round? If you are new to this, basically, there are 2 different times within a certain admission cycle in which you can apply. You can either apply in September or you can apply in January. Now, most other business schools will have a round 3, normally sometime around, say, March or April. And some schools even go further than that, and they have like a round 4 in June or May or something like that. It is important for you to know that HBS only has 2 deadlines. They used to have a round 3. They got rid of it. And the reason is that, honestly, they don't need to, they don't need a round 3. For a lot of other schools, the round 3 serves as a way to perhaps try to fill out the class, right? You get most of the applicants during round 1 and round 2, and then, well, I don't know, we still have a few spots left, and we liked some of the people in the other rounds. We didn't love them, so we'll waitlist those people, and then let's see if we can get some really cool all-stars in round 3. HBS cuts all-stars no matter what. HBS, I think over 85 or 90% of people who are offered a spot at HBS do take that spot. And because for that reason, they don't need to be managing the wait list quite as actively as perhaps other schools with more volatile yields. Because they don't need to worry about that as much. That's why for most people applying, it's round 1 or round 2. Now, if you are applying to the 2+2 program, before I jumped into this screen, I did see someone asking a question in the chat about 2+2. I believe that 2+2 is a later deadline. But it changes a little bit every year. But so I think that at least how they've done it in the past is that if you're applying through 2+2, I think you then, that's what used to be the round 3 is now for 2+2. The next thing I want to point out is application fee waivers. So this is really great for anyone who is watching. If your income is less than $65,000 US dollars per year in your current job, or your most recent job, if you've been laid off, especially if you were one of the tech layoff workers that we've been hearing a lot about, if you've been making $65,000 a year or less, you do not need to pay for the application, right? It's normally a $250 fee. They have now waived that. Now, to be clear, as we're going to get into throughout the application, one of the repeated mantras I'm going to say is you have to tell the truth. So if you're like, well, I make $70,000 a year, and so I'm kind of right above, but maybe I should say, don't do that. Just go ahead and pay the $250. Now, if you make more than $65,000 a year, you can ask for an application waiver. However, you then have to provide information to them explaining why it is. Now, I think the most common reasons for this would be if you are, let's say, supporting your family. Let's say you have your parents perhaps have recently lost their jobs or something like that, or maybe there's a health challenge somewhere and someone in your family needs money for health treatments or something along those lines. And therefore, a lot of your money is going to that. And therefore, this $250 really does create a significant burden for you. Then you can request it. I would, however, if I would only do this though, if it really would create, let's say you are making $70,000 a year instead of $65,000, just use some self-awareness here, right? If you're like, well, if I pay this $250 for the application fee, I won't be able to buy those cute shoes that I saw at Bloomingdale's the other day. Like, no, not a good enough reason. So just realize that you need to provide a good reason, and they do reserve the right to ask you for proof of these things. Um, I'm not saying they definitely will, but they reserve the right to ask you for proof. And by the way, I might make this point a few times. If at any point in the application you put something that is not true, they reserve the right to either immediately reject you, if they accepted you in the past and they later figure out that something you said was not true and you're already enrolled, they will kick you out. If that same scenario occurs, but you've already enrolled, attended, and graduated, they will rescind your degree. So they take this stuff very seriously. So whenever possible, don't say like, well, my dog really needs a new whatever it is, and that's going to be $50,000, and I can't afford the. I don't know. Just tell the truth, because I would
I
hate for you
think
to go through all this.
I think, Maria, a really good way to go about this would be you have the additional section to help you clarify anything. And Maria, you're going to go over this in a few minutes. You have the additional section, the optional section, where you can clarify a few things. If you feel that you don't want to reveal them, you're afraid of revealing some things on your application, you're afraid they see like maybe a really big gap, and you're kind of like trying to say, oh, like the career gap here is like, for example, it's 6 months, where in reality it's like 9 months. Be truthful and explain what happened, right? It's okay to say I had a break. It's okay to say I could not go be at work. I had emotional issues. I had whatever circumstance. So I think it's important to remember, you have to be as authentic as possible. And the optional essay is really a good opportunity for you to clarify more things and not leave any questions, for the outcome when they read your application. What do you think, Maria?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the optional essay is your best friend. If you have anything that is even remotely that you think might be a little red flag for them, if you think it's going to be a red flag for them, it's probably going to be a red flag. So you should absolutely use the optional information in the application to explain those circumstances. Specifically, if you are requesting a fee waiver, that is, I cannot afford this $250 fee, but my income is above $65,000, but I still want a fee waiver anyway, then you have to actually request that before you submit your application. They actually want it to be 2 weeks before the round deadline. And like with anything else, like don't tell a lie. Don't say, I really need this money for something really important. And then I'm like, okay, great. Well, so send me the hospital bills. And you're like, well, they don't exist
Yeah.
because I lied. All right. So with those things out of the way, let us jump into the personal section. So this is probably the most straightforward section. And what's funny is that in years past, before up here at the top where they would just say, like, they just had this little section that said questions or technical difficulties, please email us at whatever. And now this year they've added this little extra box up here that's like, I love this. This instruction box contains helpful tips on each of the application pages. Make sure to give it a read. Hint, hint. We think this first page is pretty straightforward, but don't hesitate to reach out if you need help. So what I love, whenever an admissions office makes any sort of a change, I love trying to imagine what must have happened for them to make that change. And so what I'm guessing is that when it used to just say, do you have questions or technical difficulties, that people would write in with really stupid questions. And so I
I
think
agree.
and that they're like, hey, please read the instructions. And we think this part's pretty straightforward. Like, they are basically saying, like, please don't contact us to ask.
I mean,
Really.
the exclamation mark says it all. Make sure to give it a read.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're not being rude, but it's just like, like,
Yes.
I don't know, where do I put my address? Where do I put my
Yeah.
name? Um, so as promised, they are correct. This is a pretty straightforward page. You're going to put your name. If you have perhaps changed your name, maybe as part of being married or getting divorced or something like that, you can put those names there. The permanent address. So this is sort of an interesting question between what is the permanent address versus the mailing address. I think the permanent address is an address where you will definitely be able to receive mail at some point during the course of the application season. So if we assume that the application season usually takes on average about 3.5 to 4 months, right, from the time you hit submit, and then about a month later they issue the interview invites, and then maybe 2 months after that they issue the decisions. This is sort of like the place where if all else fails, we will be able to send you materials here. And the mailing address, it might be the same as your permanent address. For most people, it's going to be the same. Why would mailing address be different? It might be different if, let's say, right now you are in the military and you are temporarily deployed overseas. Or let's say you work in the oil and gas industry and you are temporarily going to be on some sort of an oil rig in the middle of the ocean during the course of the next few months. If during the course of the next few months you're going to be in a slightly different place, then you can sort of separate out those two different addresses. But again, don't overthink that. And this is really nice. I think they've given you here, if you can see, valid from and valid until. So if you know that you're going to be in another place for a while, just put that there. Where do you currently reside? This is pretty straightforward. This would probably be where you spend most of your time. If you do have a job where you travel a lot, then I would put wherever it is that you rent or own a place to live. So if you are, you have your little apartment in New York City, but you're constantly on the road because let's say you're a management consultant and you've got this big client up in Canada and you're always up there, your residence is going to be wherever. When in doubt, I would say pick the place where you have a lease or a rental agreement or a mortgage or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next one is really interesting, Maria. It's really, really interesting. I remember filling that up. I think for a lot of people, it's it's different things, right? For example, for me, like I'm from Kuwait. I grew up in France, but I lived in America, right? And there's thousands of applicants that have the same situation. So I think, what do you think? What do you think the school is trying to understand here? What do you think they're? Why do you think they're asking this question, Maria?
I think first of all, they are trying to get just some context around, if your parents were in the military and you were a quote unquote army brat, or if your father was an oil exec. Wow, I'm using two military and oil examples back to back, but it just happens a lot that if somebody works in, say, the oil industry, they might be based in Dubai for a few years, and then they're based in Indonesia for a few years, and then they move around a lot. So if you've had that sort of experience, then you can explain that here. I think part of why they ask for it here is because I think there is a big temptation, sort of looking ahead to the essay question being, what else should we know about you? I think there's a big temptation for a lot of people to want to talk about their childhoods or their lives before the age of 18 in the essay. And that is really not a great use of those 900 words that you're given for the essay. So I think that they kind of, personally, I would put this here because I don't want 200 words of your 900 word essay to be like, I grew up on a farm on the outskirts of Beijing. And like, I think they're signaling like, yeah, sure, we want to know a little bit about you, but we don't care so like they give you 250 characters, right? So you can basically get across the quick basics of, I grew up in this city, but I would spend my summers in this other city, or things like that, to kind of give that quick background. But this is not like a make or break type of thing. I actually personally think they put it here because I think a lot of people are tempted to go into this stuff in their essays, and it's not important for the essay.
Yeah, I think they're also trying. You're right. I think they're also trying to get to know you. They're trying to, like you just said, build some context, right? They're trying to get to know you. And I mean, a lot of us, what shaped us is our past. So, like, what happened in your past? Where did you grow up, right? Where did you live? Where do you live now? So I think it's a really interesting question. I did not see this question years ago, but I think they've added this question just recently. I would say like maybe 2 or 3 years ago or something.
And I wonder if the addition of this question coincided with the new 900 word essay limit, because before
Mm,
it was the exact same essay question, but it had no word limit,
yeah.
which gave people plenty of rope to hang themselves with.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so I think that they were like, okay, if we only give people 900 words, there's some people just really want to tell us about the fact that their grandfather was a fisherman in Maine. Cool. Love it, but please don't waste the 900 words on this stuff that has nothing to
Right.
do with you per se, or the person you are right now as an
Mhm, mhm.
adult and as a
I agree.
leader at this point in your life.
I agree.
Okay, so I'm just going to scroll down here. Let me see if anything here. I mean, telephone numbers, biographical information. If you're applying to Harvard Business School, this should all be, if you're applying to any MBA program at all, period, you should be able to fill this out. Citizenship information, if you've got more than one citizenship, more than one nationality or more than one passport, go ahead and put that there. So you could enter in your gender identity or also your LGBTQ, however you identify in that case.
Maria, before we move on, let's look at this question from Hannah.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the question from Hannah.
Oh.
Let me jump over to. I'm sorry, because I'm in the
no
other
problem.
window.
I could just ask you. Hannah says, Maria, could you clarify what you said about not to talk too much about experience before 18 in the essay? Is this talking more about the 900 word essay, or is this about this geographic background?
It's the main essay, because I think there tends to be sometimes people. I mean, I'm not saying that don't talk about it. Obviously, if you've got something really big to share that really shaped who you are, that really put you on a trajectory, it was like this pivotal moment where you could have gone in this direction and instead you went in this other direction, and it does not fit in those 250 characters, of course you can use space in the essay to describe it. However, Harvard Business School is looking for leaders. They're pretty open about it. And if they give you 900 words to prove to them that you're the sort of leader that they want, 200 words of that spent talking about, like, I used to ride horses on a ranch in Montana and it was great and the sky was beautiful and my grandmother's warm smile. Like, sometimes people like to get really into like autobiography mode. And it's not bad. It's not like they're not going to be like, oh, we're rejecting this person right away. But it's just a wasted opportunity, right? It's a waste of those precious 900 words. So I just realize that you're the one applying, and they want to know about you and stuff that you have done, etc. Not, my grandmother was because I've been doing this for 20 years now. This is my 20th year. And you see a lot of people talking. Yeah, I know, right? I mean, I've been doing it for 3 years because I'm only 27. Anyway, no, I've been doing this for 20 years. And, you see a lot of people. Look, I get it, man. My grandmother meant a lot to me too. Most people have a grandparent or a family member or a parent who means a lot to them. That's part of the human condition.
Absolutely.
So since most human beings have that person, like, spending 200 words in the essay about like how much your father means to you or whatever, it's not always the best use of space.
Yeah, I want to say, Maria, you have tons of incredible tips on Applicant Lab about this. So just not wanting to, wanting to throw it out there.
Thank you. I do. I've got a whole bunch of stuff on HBS. So this is one of them. Yeah, like this. Yeah. This whole thing of like, most people. Maybe that's a good way to think about it. Like, if it's something that most people could say, the other ones that this is not necessarily relevant to the specific page that we're on, but in the essay, something that really annoys, that is not annoying, but it's a wasted opportunity, is to say something like, I was such a curious child growing up. Like, that's how evolution created children. If children weren't curious, they wouldn't learn to walk, they wouldn't learn to feed themselves. So, when people are like, I was so curious, or like, I've always been a very good student, like, yeah, no kidding. Like, but so is 99. If it's something that maybe 90% plus of the other people in the applicant pool could say, then maybe it's not worth going into. Most people in the applicant pool at some point have been good students. Most people in the applicant pool have gone above and beyond in some level, or studies have mattered to them, or whatever it is. So that's maybe something to think about.
Yeah, Maria, I know we want to make sure we stay on track because we still have a lot to cover, but there's a really great question that was asked. I think it's related to this. So basically, Dev says, hey, if I don't come from any hardships in particular, and I'm just a normal guy with a decent, job and academic background, can you share some good essays? Of course, we can't really share some good essays today here, but we can give you maybe an answer to your question. What do you do if you don't have like hardships in your
Dave,
life?
Thank you so much for asking this question, because I think there's this misconception out there that somehow it emerged many years ago and it's kind of entrenched itself and rooted itself in the applicant community. And it's not true. It's this idea that this is a hardship competition. that getting into business school is based on who's had the hardest story, who's had the biggest tough luck story, who's overcome the biggest obstacles. If you haven't overcome any hardships in particular, then fine, who cares? Like, I mean, that's it. When people have overcome a hardship, awesome. That might be interesting for me to know. But just because you haven't overcome a hardship, trust me, I would say the vast majority of people at HBS are from non-hardship backgrounds. So don't feel like I have to have a hardship. And even if you do have a hardship that you want to share with them, just be careful to not go too much into this, like, please feel sorry for me and give me pity points. You don't get in based on the number of pity points you get. Again, it's not a who had the hardest childhood competition. There is a competition. It's a competitive process. It's definitely a competition, but it is not a who had the hardest childhood competition. That's not what we're judging people on. So don't feel that you are at a disadvantage if you didn't have.
Thank you so much, Maria. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay,
Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going. So super quick here, language information. You can add the language. The number one thing I want to say here is do not exaggerate a language. Do not feel like, well, I'm really only kind of basic in French, but they'll be more impressed with me if I say that I'm fluent in French, because you have no idea if your admissions interviewer, if someone on the admissions team speaks French, and I'm the head of admissions, I'm going to be like, hey, Pierre, why don't you interview this person? And then in the middle of I had fluent in Spanish on my application because I am fluent in Spanish. And then halfway through my thing, my interviewer started talking to me in Spanish.
Oh, God.
And several minutes of the interview were conducted in Spanish.
Well, thank God you're fluent.
Well, yeah, because I think they are checking. They want to know, like, are you someone who lies? And I get it, right? It's tempting. I just said some words about it's a competition. Yeah, it's a competition. So I understand this, like, this feeling that some people have of like, well, I need to embellish. Do not embellish, because they will either figure it out, in which case they will they won't be happy with you, or they won't figure it out, in which case you will live like you'll be like sort of stressed out, like, well, what if they do figure it out and then I'm already enrolled and they kick me out. Okay, so moving on to family. This is also interesting because in the past it used to simply just say, we're looking to learn more about your family background, and that was pretty much it. And so now they have provided a lot more context. So they want to know the one or two adults that you spent the most time with growing up in your household. So it does not necessarily have to be your biological parent. If you were not raised by a biological parent, if you were primarily raised by somebody else, you can enter in their information instead. So I'm going to skip, I'll get back to this other stuff in a second, but down here, this is like an important thing to look at. They have this 250 character box where you can explain a little bit around, okay, like even though, I was primarily raised by my grandmother, or, my mother got divorced when I was 4 years old. And so this person is my stepfather, but to me, he's basically a father. Whatever that story is, if you feel that it's not covered or adequately obvious from what's up here, then in these other boxes, then I think you can fill in this 250 characters. So basically they're asking just information about who are your parents, how much education have they completed.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. When I applied, they actually asked me like what universities my parents attended. They're not asking that anymore, which I think is sort of nice in terms of like, I don't know. Oh, yeah.
I think here, Maria, like, I think a lot of people feel a little bit obligated to, write, oh, my parent had a job in this or that, in terms, because they kind of say here, employer, organization, employment status. Well, if your mother is a housewife, you can just write housewife, right? It doesn't have to be like, don't feel obligated to write a job if they didn't, because I know some of the cultures, especially kind of where I come from, like, housewife is really famous. So it's like, well, do I write this? Do I not write this? Because that's not a real job, right? So just be real, just be authentic, just say the truth.
Yeah,
and then you can explain it down there as well.
Yeah, don't feel that you need to elaborate. I mean, honestly, if you just write housewife here, I don't think there's any other elaboration that's really needed beyond that. So then you have the option to add a second person, and then if there were multiple people that were involved in raising you, you focus on the primary two in these boxes up here. And then you're also going to put, if you have siblings, what their ages are. So this can be interesting sometimes because I will then quickly, what happens is that when you get the PDF printout of an application, at the very top of every page, it'll have like your name and your date of birth. And so like sometimes I'll quickly be like, just to get a sense of like, like, so she's like the older sister, she's got 4 younger siblings. Like it's just sort of interesting. I don't often do anything with that information. Only if it's like something that is, for example, if you are going to apply for a fee waiver, let's say, and you say something like, oh, I need a fee waiver because I'm paying for my younger sister's college education, then it just so that everything flows together. Make sure that you put that, like you have a sibling that is 19
You're
years
right.
old,
You're
so
right.
that it all fits together.
Maria, there's a question here, just really quickly. So why do you think, oh, where did that question go? But I think it disappeared. But basically, oh, right here. Okay. Why do MBA schools ask if applicants are first generation university graduates? So Abisola asked that. I think I know the answer to this, but you're the expert here. So bring it on.
I mean, just, they want to get to know a little bit about your context. And research has shown, and it doesn't take, you don't need to see any data. It's intuitive that if you did not have parents who attended university, then when you attend university, there's a lot of sort of informal knowledge sharing that happens. So if a parent has attended university, that says to me that they, for example, there's a much better chance that, for example, if you had questions with your homework, that they could help you throughout your childhood. It makes intuitive sense that then if you go to college, that they would say to you things like, hey, like, try to go to class, or try, all these sorts of things that sometimes first generation students, when they get to college and they're truly on their own for the first time, and they don't have the guidance counselor looking out for them necessarily, and then, it can be a harder adjustment. So sometimes knowing if somebody is the first in their family or part of the first generation to go to college, then later on, the last part of the application is going to be the transcript. When I say last, I mean when it prints out and I'm reading it to prepare for giving a mock interview, for example, it's the transcript. And so if those grades, especially in those first early years of your university, were not great, I mean, it happens to everyone, but especially then if you were the first in your family to go to college, it's a lot more forgivable because you say, well, they didn't know the ropes when they got there. So
Great. Maria, we have 15 more minutes, but we have, I think, a relevant question here. I know time goes by really fast.
yeah.
Geronimo is asking, should we use that space to talk about our family overall, or is it relevant? Is it relevant just for the parents in that
Oh, you
box?
can talk about anything. So they say, is there any other additional information about your family background? Now, notice that they put in parentheses here, optional. So use your best judgment. Now, realize that in the wake of the recent Supreme Court decision banning affirmative action, they are no longer allowed to ask you point blank, are you from, a minority group that is discriminated against? They cannot ask you that anymore. And so someone asked earlier about hardships. This is the place not if you don't have hardships, leave it blank. It's optional. But if you do have some sort of a extenuating family circumstance that you think helps them get to know you better as a person, absolutely talk about that. I do not think, however, that it says any information about your family background. I don't think this is the place to say, like, I grew up in a middle class household outside of Chicago and my family loves to go golfing. Like, I would use my own personal take on this again, and they're not going to reject you if you write something inane like that, but that's not going to be like the basis of reject. But it's like, it's just sort of annoying. Like, no, like, read the room. This is them trying to sort of get a sense of like, did you have to overcome hardships? It's okay if you didn't. The vast majority of people, I think, had pretty comfortable lives before they got to HBS. So it's okay. But if you did, like, let them know. Some other things that might be interesting here is, for example, I was talking about this with my husband the other day. A surprisingly high number of people that we knew at HBS had siblings who had very severe learning disabilities or medical conditions. And we found that out about them by just getting to know them and being their friends. But oftentimes, if you have something like that, it doesn't have to be your parents. It could be a sibling, and being raised in that environment can really help you develop a sense of empathy, for example, that others might not have. Okay, so super quick resume. The number one thing I will tell you for the resume is try to keep it to 1 page. They say 1 to 2 pages in length because they're being friendly. But one of the key things to know about HBS in general is that because their pedagogy is the case method depends upon everyone in the class contributing really good information whenever they raise their hands and speak. It also means that you get maybe 20 seconds to make your point. And because the entire school revolves around that pedagogy, it is a school that is really interested in people who are able to communicate the most essential thing as quickly and effectively as possible. So just let's keep that in mind. So yeah, you're allowed to have a 2-page resume. Sure. I would really advise you to try to keep it to 1. To really, again, just to show them, someone's like, oh, but I have 10 years of experience. How do I do that? You know what? It is possible. And it helps show them that you have a knack for intuitively understanding what is the most important thing to communicate in this moment. Because when you get to the classroom, you have to do that every day when you raise your hand, right? Don't raise your hand. You actually get a bad grade at HBS if you raise your hand and say something that like doesn't really move the conversation forward. So a lot of this application is meant to try to get a sense, and the interview is meant to get a sense of, are you the sort of person who's going to thrive in our environment? So moving on to the employment section, you can list up to 3 employers. If you've had fewer, that's fine. But if you've had more, you have to pick the last 3. Now, if you have had, this is an important thing because this does change quite a bit from school to school. Some schools will say, okay, if you've been at one company for 7 years and you've had 3 different jobs within that company, list them out as 3 quote unquote separate jobs. HBS's preference is for all of your jobs under one employer to be listed here as one employer. However, sometimes people have been, let's say, in a rotational program, and they really feel, again, this is about getting at your judgment in terms of how good are you as a communicator. If it's really going to add a lot that I'm not going to pick up from the resume, and it's really important that I see each of these roles that you've had at this company separate to really get some valuable background into the experiences that you've had, the leadership that you've had, the management that you've had, whatever that is, then yes, you can call it 2 separate employers. Of course, then it limits you, then will only have 1 left. So think about that. So yeah, just use your best judgment. If my preference is to try to keep them all, if you've had several roles within one company, to count that as quote unquote 1 employer. Just in the interest of time, my biggest piece of advice here is honestly, like, do not exaggerate or embellish anything. I realize that it can be especially tempting. There's going to be a place in here, if I fill it out enough, there's going to be a place where it's going to say, hold on.
Is it about, I think, the salary or something?
The salary number, yeah. I'm trying to get it to, like, it's one of these things where, like, it opens up, like, when I fill stuff in. It's going to ask you about your...
It would be probably...
oh, here it is. It opened up.
Okay,
There we go.
right here.
Okay. So it'll have your salary and your bonus. If you have like extra stuff, if you're like, well, I don't have a salary, like I don't. The way my company works is, like, for example, when I used to work in Hong Kong, there was something called a housing allowance. It wasn't a salary, it wasn't a bonus, but it was still money that I got. Then I turned around and gave to my landlord. Like, though, that sort of compensation stuff, you might want to explain that. Perhaps that might be something that goes into an optional essay. Now, when it comes to salary, people tend to freak out a little bit because they'll say something like, well, what if I'm not making enough? Like, why do they even want to know my salary? Why does it matter? And I think this is one of the reasons why I really advocate, by the way, if you've been at several jobs within one company, why I like keeping that within one company, because then that delta, that difference between what your entry-level salary was and what your salary today, now 4, 5, 6 years later, is, hopefully it's gone up. And so by putting it in one employer, quote unquote, I can see that upward trajectory, and that gives me a sense of confidence that your employer likes you. Right? If they didn't like you at all, you'd get fired. If they were sort of meh on you, you might get a little promotion here and there, but that bump up in salary might be, 5% or something like that. So if you've had like a really strong trajectory, not just in terms of titles, but also in terms of compensation, a lot of times employers will put their money where their mouth is. However, do not lie here. Do not say like, oh, well, I'm going to embellish this, or, one I've gotten in the past is like, well, but Maria, next year I'm going to get promoted and then they're going to double my salary. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Here you put, because if you get in and they do the background check.
I was just going to mention the background check.
Yeah.
I was just going to mention that.
There is a background check after you get accepted. Yes. And there are also times where prior to being offered admission, they will they will call your company. If they really
Oh,
have a
yeah.
question, they will call your company, they will call your employer, they will call your recommender. My recommender actually got called because to verify that something I had said I had done in my application, I had actually done.
Absolutely.
So then here, the important thing here is they give us the employer description, which is what I would advise here is think about, again, what is important for me to communicate to them. If you work for a company that is not a household name, then it might be worth it to spend these 250 characters to explain a little bit more about, Maria Co. It's a company based in Los Angeles, California. Here's what it does. Like to explain to them so they know. If you work for a really big company that's a household name, the big companies often have a million different divisions. So let's say you work at Alphabet or Google. There's a big difference between working in Maps versus Gmail versus advertising versus YouTube, whatever that is. So what I advise for the employer description is if you work for a small company, use it to explain to me what the company does. If you work for a big company, help me figure out where within that big company you sit by putting the employer description. I love this. Please briefly explain your role with your organization without using jargon or technical terms. I think that this additional verbiage here about without using jargon or technical terms, I don't think they used to have this. And again, you
That's
can
true. They didn't have it.
imagine the people who were I'm in charge of the ASP.NET PHP framework and optimizing the API, whatever. Like, oh my God, I don't know what that means. That's not useful. And so I don't think they used to say it quite this way because I think they would just assume that people would figure that out. That's not a good idea, but maybe.
No, you know what? Use simple terms, I would say, even though the AdCom has seen thousands, if not millions, of these applications, but it's like use simple terms, just try to be simple. Maria, do we have a little bit of space to ask a couple questions here before we move on from the employment?
I just wanted to, because the employment section is actually, it's really important in the context of just thinking about, you've got the resume, and the resume is going to be your greatest hits. Right? Your resume is going to have things like the bullet points that focus primarily on the accomplishments that you had. What was the actual output that you created? What was the change that you created? What was the impact that you made? So I helped launch a new division of the company that made $10 million a year. Fine. That's what's going to go in the resume. What goes in these little boxes, you have key accomplishments and most significant challenge. You've got 250 characters for each one of these. This is where, for other schools, I'm not saying to ignore this stuff and just write haha, joke words in here. You still want to fill it out and you want to take it seriously for other schools, but especially for HBS, do not write it exactly the same way as the resume. Do not copy and paste from your resume. Think about, this is an opportunity for me to provide more context around what's the bullet point on the resume. So the bullet point on the resume says, I launched a new $10 million division. That's the accomplishment. Fine. But the bullet point doesn't tell me, for example, that the VP of marketing tried to derail my project several times and she pulled my funding halfway through. Something like that. Like some of these backgrounds, some of these, especially because leadership is at its core interpersonal, I want your most significant challenge to be something that shows me that you have good people skills. And your key accomplishments, if they're already covered in the resume, what you can put here is the context that shows anything that shows you having good people skills to achieve that accomplishment. So the most significant challenge should not be, I tried to do a cloud server migration and we lost a bunch of files. The more significant challenge is something like a person in his 50s was assigned to report to me and he told me that he didn't want to report to me. And so then how did you overcome that, right? Those sorts of people things are always going to be far more useful in terms of gauging your leadership potential. One way to think about it, and something I say frequently, is think about the quote unquote job they are hiring you for. No business school is hiring you to come and be their database manager. No business school is hiring you to come in and drill for petroleum on their grounds. So whatever, I've got oil on the mind today. So whatever it is that you do for your job, proving that you are very, very, very good at the technical aspects of your job is not going to get you anywhere because they're not hiring you for that. They're hiring you to come in the short term, be a great and positive influence on your classmates and on the campus community. And in the long term, and this is the most important thing, are you going to go on to become an alumnus or alumna that's going to make the school proud? Are you the sort of person who is going to achieve great things and not end up in jail? Achieve great things, but do it in a way that is legal and positive and all that other good ethical stuff. And that's what they're trying to get at. And so if your challenge is something that is too technical, that's I don't care. Actually, I actually don't care if you're a good engineer. For example, I know a lot of engineers tend to apply. Whether or not you're a good engineer doesn't really matter. There are a lot of amazing engineers out there who cannot hold a conversation with someone else. There are a lot of amazing engineers out there that no one wants to work for, right?
I would say from my experience, Maria, with Kellogg oh, sorry. Did
No,
I
go.
lose you? Okay. I would say from my experience at Kellogg right now, definitely teamwork. Teamwork. I mean, they do care about how well do you work with people? How well do you, because you're going to be assigned from day one, your cohort, you're going to be assigned teams and sections every single class, and how well do you work with people? So, so to your point, that's really important. Maria, before we move on to the post MBA, we have a question from Chris.
Yeah.
Chris is saying, "Hi, Maria. I'm an independent contractor and have had multiple short-term job contracts over the last couple of years. I would prefer to list more important work history. How should I approach this?" What do you think, Maria?
Yeah. So, Chris, what I would do is I would call your first employer. You could say self-employed, or if you have like like a LLC or something that Chris Spurlock Inc. or whatever, just make that one job and then say, I've had this job for 2 years. Within that 2-year job, I've had 6 different clients. And here are the things that I've helped them with. But that's what I would do. I would say like self-employed or independent. You could even say like job title, independent contractor.
Right.
I mean, you might want
Right.
to say what type of contractor you are,
Yes.
whatever you might want to add more detail, but that I would treat the independent contracting years as one quote unquote job. And then that would give you those two other employers
Okay.
spaces to put them.
Great. I don't think that we talked about the accomplishments section yet. Lewis, we're going to get back to your question when we go there. Maria, just really quickly, if we're working in an early age startup that is not listed, will the vested stock still count as salary?
It does not.
That's okay.
Salary is salary. Salary is the money you make. It is, if I were to take all of your paychecks over the course of a year and add them up prior to taxes or whatever, that's your salary. Now, if you have significant stock options and you're like, well, my salary is very small, that's where you can put, let me see, is it in supplemental info? Let's see. Okay, lots of other schools call it the optional essay. HBS calls it additional information. This is where you might want to say something like, you've got 500 characters. This is where you might say something like, look, my salary is only whatever, but my stock is, I'm 2 years into vesting a 4-year vesting schedule, and my stock is worth whatever. But do not put that as salary. It's not salary. So don't put it as salary.
Okay, but before we move on, Maria, just really quickly, sorry, just a lot of questions. So in US dollars, so Jetin, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. In USD, Indian salaries seem quite less. Does this reflect badly in my application?
It doesn't, Jetin, because they're going to judge you. They're judging you in your bucket. So like if someone is working for like a nonprofit in India, their salary is obviously going to be less than someone who's working in investment banking in New York City. So it's not about the absolute number. For me, more than anything, what matters, what I like to see at least, it's not a bad thing if you don't have this, but I do like to see it if you do have it, is that upward trajectory. If you started at a certain level and you've been working for 4 years, if your salary has stayed the same, what does that reflect? That your employer, they like you. If they hated you, they'd fire you. But do they love you?
Okay.
And by the way, this is something your recommenders can touch upon. If you're like, yeah, I work for a company that never gives anyone promotions, your recommenders can go to bat for you. And by the way, guys, if what we're saying is like useful or interesting for you, please give a like to this video.
Absolutely.
And if you're not already subscribed to GMAT Club, what are you waiting for?
I mean, seriously. Seriously, because honestly, when you guys like hit like and you subscribe and you tell your friends about these videos, basically it helps us to make more videos like this. And we have a lot of questions. So, all right, Maria, let's move on. Post MBA goals. Let's do this.
Post MBA goals. So, spoiler alert, they give you 500 characters to describe your post MBA goals. let's think back. I'm going to do this Socratically, case method style. If earlier I said the essay that they are asking is basically saying, we've seen everything else in your application. What else should we know? Pop quiz. Should your essay then go into talking about your goals? It shouldn't.
No.
You can. It can't. Like, I'm not, again, these are not hard and fast rules. The only time I would really explain this in an essay is like if you have like a completely like, I'm currently over here in my career and I want to go whoosh to do something totally different and it makes no sense at all in those 500 characters, then you might want to explain that in the essay. But for most people, you do not then say, if you say here, I want to work for a self-driving car manufacturer and strategy after business school and one day run a self-driving car company, I then do not want to see in the essay, let me tell you about self-driving cars and how much they mean to me. Did you know that there are going to be 3 million self-driving cars? Like, no, they already asked you. If they wanted to know more about your career goals, they would give you more than 500 characters. Some schools give you 500 words to talk about your career goals. HBS gives you 500 characters.
Right.
It's a separate section. It's not an essay question. They don't want to know. So do not waste your 900 words elaborating on this unless it's like a complete wackadoodle story. And by the way, if your story is so wackadoodle that you need to go into your 900 word essay to explain it, maybe that's a sign that your career vision might be kind of like a risky one to apply with.
Sure, definitely. The post MBA goals here, there's a section for the post MBA goals, which means we don't want to see this on your essay unless what Maria mentioned in the exception, that you want to explain some things and you want to give context so that your story flows better and it makes more sense.
Exactly. And one more thing here with the post MBA goals, this is another place where I understand, I get it. There's a temptation some people have to embellish here, or just like, what do they want to hear? Or what do they do not, I see this so many times. I've seen people put like, I want to work, like, especially if they're applying with a career changing story, they'll mention like some new, I want to work in management consulting or something. And so then I ask them, if I interview them, they'll say they want to work for Adidas after they graduate. And I'm like, cool, you say here you want to work for Adidas. What do you think about the Yeezy controversy last year? If you mention a company here and you have not been following that company and you don't know anything about that company, oh my gosh, you risk looking really dumb during the interview.
Absolutely.
If I'm like, yeah, you said you wanted to work for Adidas. That's really cool. Tell me about their stock price.
They ask these questions
in the interview. Yes,
they do.
Yes, anything is fair game. Absolutely. Absolutely.
They do.
Or sometimes people will put like these sort of like politically correct type things like, I want to create a company that makes inclusive shoes for the modern woman. And I'm like, what does that mean? It sounds like a bunch of BS. What do you mean an inclusive shoe? And maybe you really mean something legitimate by an inclusive shoe, in which case you explain it to me. But if you're like I'm going to tell really quickly if you just said that because you're like, oh, inclusivity is a hot buzzword, so I need to put the word inclusive somewhere in my stuff. Great, but just realize anything is fair game. So don't just put something there that you're like, well, it's going to sound good if I put the word inclusivity, for example. Cool. I love inclusivity. I'm all about inclusivity.
I think there is a misconception, Maria, to add to your point. There's a misconception that interviews just go over like, tell me a little bit about your background, post MBA goals, career aspirations, what's your long-term goal, what's your short-term goal. Well, if things don't really make sense in your overall application, they're going to ask you these type of questions. They're definitely going to ask you these type of questions. And I think the reason is because they want to know, hey, do you actually know what you want to do? Do you actually know? Absolutely. I agree with you, Maria.
Yeah. And well, with HBS, because again, if we think about, they're looking for people who are going to become leaders in the world and also people who are going to be good in the case method environment. If you say something that's BS in a class, there's 89 other people in that room who are going to get points from the professor if they call you out on that BS. So if you're the sort of person who BSs as sort of it just comes naturally to you, be sure that it's something that you can back up. Because if you're in a room with 89 other really smart people and you say something like that in a classroom, I'm going to raise my hand and be like, what do you even mean by an inclusive shoe company? Like, what? Come on, dude. So So the HBS interview is very, very, very different from any other school's interview. It is not about like, so tell me about yourself. They do not ask, actually. They almost never ask, walk me through your resume. I've read your resume. I don't need you to walk me through it.
Um,
It's a no nonsense kind of a place.
Maria, for
Yes.
the post MBA goals, can you go back to a section really quickly?
Yeah.
Are you? Someone asked, "Are you?" Or Simone, I believe, are you expected to explain why you have the particular career goal, or simply state the goal?
I think this, if you can fit it in 500 characters, a lot of their other text boxes in this form are 250, so they're giving you twice as many characters. So yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely in those 500 characters say, here's why this matters to me. Or if, let's say you're a career switcher, but you do have some transferable skills, this might be a good place to say, like, I want to work in something like investment banking because of whatever. And I know that my I've spoken to 3 other investment bankers who were also electronics engineers before business school, and they have said that this is a doable type of a goal. Something like that could also work. But yeah, this could absolutely be, especially if you're a career switcher, to just explain, like, what's the motivation. Sometimes
Should
it might be
we?
obvious, right? If I look at your background and it's like, I've spent 7 years as a solar panel engineer and I majored in solar engineering and I want to go to business school because I want to run a solar panel company one day, I get it. Right? But if you
Yes.
have anything a little bit more uh, fuzzy, then you might want to use those 500 characters to explain that here. I don't think that there's anything really here in education that, let's see, you would add your
Can I
institutions.
add?
Yeah.
I think, can I add, maybe from my experience doing these like GMAT club events? I think one thing that comes up most of the time is the transcripts, right? I mean, the GPA. Should I transfer my GPA? That is a question that is always asked. So what do you think about that? If you come from a country that does not have the 4.0 grading system?
That is, every school will tell you exactly what they want. So some schools will say, and this is less and less common, but in the past, some schools would say, like, okay, if you're on a 10-point grading scale, here's how here's how you magically transfer that into a 4.0 scale. Most schools don't try to force it if if your GPA or whatever is not on a 4.0 scale. Don't, because honestly, what I look at most is the transcript.
Yeah.
Right. The GPA itself, this is one of my pet peeves about, like, when people do, like, evaluate my profile and they'll say, like, oh, my GPA is this or my GPA is that. The GPA in a vacuum, that number in a vacuum, means nothing, because
Right.
if you went to a really easy college and you majored in something really easy, right? Like, let's say I would have majored in Spanish at a local, like, okay, oh, what? She got a 4.0. Whoa. Like, big whoop. Right.
Yeah.
But if someone might have like a 3 or 2.8, but it's like chemical engineering at MIT, holy cow. Right.
Right.
Who has proven, simply, if we just judge by the transcripts alone, who's got more intellectual horsepower based on those transcripts? The person with the 2.8, even
Yeah.
though it's a 2.8. So it's more, I'm gonna glance at the GPA. Sure, it matters, of course, but I don't think it matters nearly as much as a raw number as people think it does.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this question, but someone asked, if my GPA is 3.66, can I round it up to 3.7? My answer to this is, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. If it only asks you to do it out by 1 decimal,
Okay,
if it gives you
all
2
right.
decimal places, then do it. But on the, what I would I would do it on the resume. Why not round that up on the resume? There's no hard or fast rule, right?
So are we moving on to, because we have 15 minutes, so do you want to move
We
on
can
to
do
the essay, or should
activities.
we?
Well, so let's just do the other key part of the application that and I love how they list it out to tell, like, the essay, look, the essay's like here. It's after all this other stuff to really signal to you visually, like, what else should we know? So the activities and then the awards and the recognition, these are basically these are very similar sections, insofar as both of them limit you to mentioning 3. So 3 either extracurricular activities. This does not have to be a formal thing. For example, if you are heavily involved in, say, your church or mosque or synagogue or whatever, temple, whatever it might be, but you're like, well, I'm not formally a volunteer, but I'm there all the time. Like, yes, you can talk about that. That is
Yeah,
absolutely in terms of activities. They really want to try to get a sense of what are you doing when you're not at work.
definitely. I talked about that actually. You mentioned mosques. So I'm Muslim and I'm from Kuwait. And during Ramadan, I used to volunteer at the local mosque for the meals, putting out the meals and for a good 20 days, So yeah, I did write that. So definitely, it doesn't have to be like a formal right thing, but it's something that you're doing outside of work that you're volunteering your time to do.
Right. Exactly. So even if it's not something formal, but you do get only 3. If you have more than 3 activities or more than 3 awards, it's also the same thing with awards and recognition. They limit you to 3. If you have less than 3, no problem. Don't make up an award or something or like grasp for something that's lame. But if you have more than 3, you can always put them in either the resume, or if it's something that's extra super duper meaningful for you, you can then go into the essay. I think this is a 200 box. Let me see. This is a little tip that I have where if you type in 10 digits and then you just copy and paste. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11,
Oh God, it keeps going.
12. 20. It stopped at 20. So it's a 200 character box.
Okay.
Um, some things you might want to put in the description, similar to the job stuff. Yes, absolutely say, I volunteered at the mosque and I helped serve 400 meals during Ramadan. Wonderful. But maybe there's something, maybe you could say any other information that you think might be relevant. For example, if you are from Kuwait and Kuwait is a majority Muslim country, then you might not have to explain, well, why did you get involved with the mosque? That's kind of obvious. But if someone is like from a non-Muslim country and they weren't born Muslim and they converted to that religion, that might be an interesting thing to mention here. Like, the Muslim faith really spoke to me. I attended a seminar in college and I converted, and that's why I volunteered them out. Like, that could be a really interesting thing to talk about. Or if there was, again, some sort of interpersonal challenge, or maybe you were, the catering company that was making the, like, oh, they called you at the last minute and they're like, we don't have any food left, and you had to overcome some sort of a last minute challenge. This description is kind of a vague term. So absolutely mention, like, what did you do, and some of those basics. Don't repeat stuff that's already on the resume, though.
Yeah,
That's a wasted
yeah,
opportunity. But you can also include, if it's sort of like something that is easily kind of put into its own little box,
yeah.
its own little like separate area, you can absolutely talk about, like, why did you get involved with this particular activity, or what does it mean to you, or how have you grown or learned from it. It's not a lot of characters, but you can definitely, with enough with enough editing.
Maria, Audrey just asked a question. If you can see it on the screen, does family
Oh,
obligations, responsibilities count as activities?
absolutely, Audrey. So Audrey, one place you might want to put that is earlier in the family section, where they have that box to explain a little bit more about your family background. But absolutely, family obligations absolutely count as activities. If it's something that is a meaningful place that you spend your time when you are not at work, let me know about that for sure, because that can absolutely be a way for you to tell me things about you that I wouldn't otherwise know. So absolutely. So moving on to awards and recognition. These can be any sort. It could be academic, military, extracurricular. If you don't have 3 awards, don't panic. I think I only had 1. So don't feel like, oh, everyone else has 3, so I need to come up with 3. In fact, if you have an award that you got, but it's actually like just between us, it's kind of lame, and you're like, well, everyone kind of got, it's like the participation trophy, and honestly, Maria, everyone got it. Like, maybe just don't put it. I'd rather see like one award that is like really cool and makes me go cool, as opposed to like, oh, this person is just trying to stuff the application and you don't really like womp womp. But again, the basis of selection in that 200 characters, as with activities, you could absolutely say, like, here's how I was chosen. I really want you to, if this was an elite award, tell me any information you've got about 20 out of 500 people were selected, or I was, the top 3 out of 200, whatever that is, to give me a sense of just how, if it was an elite award, help me understand how elite that award was by telling me, like, how many only awarded to 2% of people who do whatever. That sort of information can be really good for me to know. And then as well, if you won the award because you contributed above and beyond something, or again, if you got involved with something, I won the award because I launched an inclusive shoe company that made shoes for dogs. Okay, great. Like why did you do that? Like that might fit in the 200 characters. Just kind of ask yourself, like, what questions might they have? Right? Like pretend another sort of mental hack that I often use is, imagine that someone is applying for a job at your company and you are reading this as their application. And they say something like, I won the H.G. Johnson Award in undergrad. And they provide no other information. You're like, well, if someone applying to a job at your company put that, you'd be like, well, what does that even mean? Or like, should I be impressed? Does everyone get this? Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? So just kind of put yourself in their shoes. You're like, I've never been an admissions officer before. No, but maybe you've been involved in helping your company choose the summer intern that they're going to hire or something like that. So kind of keep that in mind.
Maria, we have time because the Darden application session is going in parallel, so we don't have to rush. But let me ask you let me ask you a couple of questions. So Nawid just asked, do team awards count as awards? I have the answer to that, if you don't mind, Maria. I believe if you, for example, if you were Employer of the Month or something like that, definitely that counts as an award. And of course, Maria, if you want to add something to that, you're more than welcome to. Shazim also asked, would group awards be okay here, i.e. winning a national dance competition? So I can speak about just a personal experience really quickly. So I'm actually a singer back home, and I won some awards, and I wrote about those. And that was actually during my interview, they asked me questions about these because that was an interesting thing to talk about. So yes, I would say if you won a national dancing competition, Maria, wouldn't you want to add that? I think that's cool.
Absolutely. I wouldn't even be applying to business school because I would be off with my dancing career. I'd be in Paris right now. Yeah, no. So for the folks asking about the team award, like if you were a member of a team that won an award.
Yes. Just added the question,
Yes,
Maria.
it counts as an award, but what I would then say in the basis of selection is just to be sure that it's clear that like I was a member of a five-person team that won a robotics competition. My job was to do blank. So if there was anything within a team and you had a very defined sort of role within that team, like what was your particular biggest impact within that team, if you can explain that?
Yes, absolutely. So if you were chosen employee of the month amongst maybe like 100 people or something like that. So on a bigger scale, what that means, I agree. Maria, someone asked also, I believe Ife Jesu, so asked if I belong to a committee at work. So for example, social impact responsible for community outreaches, does it count as an activity?
100% it counts as an activity. In my opinion, anything that is not part of your required job, that I think that counts, even if it happens at work, in the context of work. So if you're part of like a committee at work that raises funds for the United Way, or every year you organize your coworkers to do a race to raise money for charity or something like that, or if you're part of like an employee resource group at work, those are absolutely, in my opinion, those are extra, quote unquote, extracurricular activities because you're not getting paid extra for them. Your employer did not hire you to do that. It's sort of an added bonus. So for me, that does count. I see the
Maria,
next.
that's a good question here, right? What
And
do you
the
think?
award back to high school. So Anne, I would use my judgment. My gut reaction is no. High school was high school. Like if you let's take the example of Dalal being a singer. Dalal probably won awards for singing in high school.
Let's not give my example. Let's give another example.
Okay, someone whose name is something that rhymes with Dalal.
Maria, for
Maria
example.
won awards. I did not win any awards for being a singer, but let's say I did in high school, but if it's something that was really meaningful to me, it's an activity I would have continued, and therefore I would have more than just high school to talk about. Right. So let's say I won some sort of math competition in high school and some sort of math Olympiad. Yeah, you might want to mention that. But then again, if you won the math Olympiad like your junior year of high school, and then you use that to get into Caltech for college, it's kind of implicit that you're good at math. So it might not. I would use my best judgment. I think when you are talking about high school awards, first of all, if you're only a year, if you're a 2+2 applicant, then maybe, because that way you're a senior in college right now if you're 2+2. So then high school was 6 years ago. But if you're like 27, high school was over a decade ago. So my gut would be to say don't do it unless it was something at like the nationwide level. Like I won what's it called? Like the Westinghouse Science Fair competition or something like that. That might be an interesting thing to do. But if you are going to do it, by the way, make it the third one. They tell you to put them in order of importance. If you've got other things to talk about, then I would make it sort of the least important. But if you're like, yeah, my high school awarded me the whatever, like best student of the whatever. Yeah, well, obviously, like because I was good in high school, got into a good college, and because I did well in college, I got into a good job, and because I'm good at my job, right? So think about the fact that a lot of your background is implicit in causalities, right? If you were bad at your job, you would have gotten fired, for example, or if you were a terrible student in high school, you might not have gotten into college. So just sort of use your best judgment, I would.
Okay, so I think we talked a lot about awards. Now we're going to talk about, I think, the part that a lot of people joined us to ask about, which is the essay, Maria, and you're the expert here.
Yeah.
So the Harvard essay, let's talk about the essay.
Yeah. So one thing that's different, it's different this year, but is not really truly different, is they've added this language this year of we invite you to share personal or professional experiences from your background that give you a unique ability to contribute to HBS. I I think that this little blurb was not previously
No, it
part of
wasn't.
there. And I've had people ask me, like, well, so does this change anything? It does not change anything, because the whole time it's always been about you showing what you can contribute to HBS in terms of this is not I'm going to join the healthcare club and run the healthcare conference. They don't mean it in terms of that, what you're contributing to HBS. It's more like, who are you as a person and as a leader, so that way you're contributing to HBS in terms of your background, because I'm trying to picture you in a classroom discussion. So let's say you've had an opportunity as a manager. Maybe this isn't a great opportunity, but maybe you've had to lay off members of your team, and that was a really hard thing for you to go through as a boss. Like that sort of a thing, that's like case method gold, right? Because at some point in your 2 years, you're going to talk about reduction of force in some sort of a class. And how cool is it if that person then raises their hand and says, well, I've actually had to lay people off, and this is what it was like, and this is what I did wrong, or this is what I did right, but if I could do it over again, I would have done it differently, right? It's not about contributing to the school in terms of like what clubs you're going to join. It's contributing in terms of what perspectives are you going to share in that classroom environment that is going to make a little light bulb go off across everyone else's heads. So for me, and I'm not saying this to be like cryptic necessarily, but like think about really reflect on this question. We've reviewed the rest of your application. What more would you like us to know? What more do we need to know about you to decide whether or not we think that you're going to be, in the short term, the sort of person that makes the HBS campus a nicer place, blah, blah, blah. But more importantly than that, the sort of person who in the long term is going to make the school proud. And in my opinion, how you do that is you focus primarily on your leadership, explaining your leadership stories in a way that is not at all covered in the resume and has not already been fully covered in that little employment box. What are some details behind those bullet points on the resume that I would not have guessed, or that make me say, wow, now that I know, right? If you were volunteering at your mosque to like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, but we lost power or whatever it was. Like, oh my gosh, now it's what would have otherwise been like, oh, that's interesting. Now that I
Right.
know these other details, I'm like, woo. So I think primarily, if we think about the fact that it's a school that looks for a habit of leadership, if you're in doubt, then talk about, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I keep losing you sometimes, so I'm not sure if
Oh,
you're
sorry.
talking. No, no, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. It might be from my end, so I apologize. Maria, I want to say, like, I think they added this part, the we invite you to share personal or professional experiences from your background. I think it's probably because a lot of students or a lot of applicants email them asking, should we talk about a personal experience? Should we talk about professional experience?
they're basically saying it here, like you could talk about something personal or professional, right? Um, and then the other thing that I want to mention to you, and this is a question, um, can you talk about a specific maybe bullet point that you wrote on any parts of your application, but you want to elaborate more on it and make it a story? So you can do that, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing I would add, I'll make up an example on the fly in a second. But the other thing that I want to add is not just explaining things that aren't on the resume, but also again, most of the people, not, a large percentage of people who work in HBS admissions are themselves graduates of Harvard Business School. So these are not people who are stupid. These are people who get it. And so if you have a bullet point on your resume that says something like, I led a 10-person team on a project that launched a new whatever it is, they know that there were probably things that you did as part of that bullet point doesn't cover everything. But if there are some things that are obvious, if you're like, don't put in the essay things that are obvious. So for example, in the essay, please don't waste my time by saying things like, well, as the project leader, I made sure to call a weekly update meeting. I made an agenda for the meeting. I sent out the agenda for the meeting prior to the meeting. And then during the meeting, we followed the agenda. And then after the meeting, I sent out okay, like obvious, like most people who are leading a project have do things like, let's have a check-in meeting. Let's have an agenda. Let's have a project plan. So if you're going to talk about things that you did as part of a bullet point on your resume, just keep in mind that please don't talk about the obvious stuff. Right? Or the stuff that's easy to guess, right? Because that's, again, especially now that they're making you limit it to 900 words. What a wasted opportunity. It's not that it's bad. It's just like it's not bad if you're like, oh, at HBS I want to study with this professor. I do not advocate ever talking about why HBS in your HBS essay at all. Again, a wasted opportunity. They know that they know that their school is good. You don't need to tell them that you want to marry the case method in your essay. You don't need to tell them like Harvard is an illustrious institution. Like, no, they know.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Absolutely.
for that. We know. So don't. This is not about us. This is not about us making HBS feel good about itself. This is about you showing them that you're the sort of leader. So just to sort of give an example that I think I started to make up earlier. Like, let's say you're leading this project and it was a 10-person team, and you're leading the team, and that's the bullet point. Maybe what I don't know that really talks to me about the sort of leader you are is that one of the people on the team had a personal crisis halfway through the project, and they had to take a leave of absence. And you were given the choice to either fire them and bring someone else on board or keep them employed and collecting a salary. And that was a tough decision you had to make. How did you make that decision? That might be a really interesting thing for me to know, to get a sense of a deeper sense of okay, I know what you've done, but how do you do it? And when those difficult moments happen, what sort of a leader are you? And these could be things where there's no right answer, right? You could very easily, especially not to keep talking about the case method all the time, but you could just as easily say, well, you should totally fire that person because they're a drag on the rest of the team and it's a recession. I mean, we don't have the money to pay for them. Or you could say, no, we need to be humane. Or maybe the answer was somewhere in the middle. So things like that are really powerful. So how, maybe you say, well, the bullet point is like, I convinced the CEO to adopt a new thing. Okay, cool. That's the bullet point. Maybe you go into a little bit more detail in that employment box, but what I don't know is that the CEO originally hated your idea and screamed at you and told you to get out of her sight. Right? Like, how do you bounce back from something like that? Because if I just read the bullet point that says I proposed an idea to the CEO and the CEO accepted it, maybe it was maybe your idea was really obvious and the CEO was like, yeah, fine, whatever. There's Maria again with one for crazy ideas. Just will you shut up if I tell you yes? Okay, great, go do it. Or that could be the backstory behind that bullet point, like sort of on the one end, the sort of like the least impressive end. But the most impressive end could be the CEO at first was kicking and screaming and saying, this is the worst idea I've ever heard. My gosh, I can't believe, I should have security escort you out. And then how did you convince them from that? What did you do using your interpersonal skills, the very interpersonal skills that you're going to need for the rest of your career? because again, I'm not hiring you to be a good engineer. I'm not hiring you to be a good accountant. I'm hiring you to be the sort of leader who's going to go out into the world after HBS 1, 5, 20 years afterwards, and at a minimum, not embarrass the school, and hopefully, in fact, make the school proud. And the way that you do that, regardless of where your career goes, it doesn't matter what industry you work in. It almost doesn't matter what function you work in. There are some core leadership skills that are going to be useful no matter what impact it is you decide you want to make in the world. And so focusing on showing me that you're the sort of person who has that intuition of how to work with other people, or how to get along with other people, or how to overcome interpersonal obstacles, things of that nature go a lot further than a lot of other stuff that people tend to put in here.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. That was great. So I think, Maria, you mentioned a few professional experiences from the background, but also from a personal, on a personal level, you can also talk about, I believe, a personal experience that led you to have these career goals. Like, what led you from your past? Maybe your past shaped what you want to do in the future, right? In the short term and long term. So, I mean, I know that's how I approached my essay. So, there's definitely a way to approach it and talk about, like, professionally, like, professional experiences like you just mentioned, but also another way is you could talk about a personal experience as well. So it's not just professional, right?
You could talk about a personal experience if it shaped who you are as a leader.
Absolutely.
If you have a personal experience that shaped your career goals, I would like to see that in the 500 character.
Right.
See if you can smush that in there.
Right.
If possible. It's not always possible. And if it's not possible, cool. But just realize that in terms of like compartmentalizing, if you're like, hey, I want to work in prosthetic limbs because my hamster has a prosthetic limb when I was growing up, and that may great, but maybe that goes into the 500 character box.
Right. Maria, Hannah just asked, should we have multiple examples or go deep into one?
That's a great question, Hannah. And honestly, I'm not trying to avoid answering it. It really depends on the person, because one quote unquote only one example, there might be a lot that happened in that one example, especially if it was something that took place over several months. All else being equal, I prefer to see a couple of different examples, because then that way, if I want to know a lot of details, I can zoom in on that during the interview. So don't forget, like hopefully the goal of the written application is to get to the interview stage. So this isn't like the last word that you ever get. You then get an interview if all goes well. And then after the interview, you get a post-interview reflection, which is a document, sort of like a quick little email you're allowed to send them in case there's anything from your interview that, thinking back, you're like, oh, I should have explained this a little bit better. You then have the chance to have the final word. So personally, I think all else being equal, and look, you might have like one example, but it's like, wow, it's a cool example. But usually I prefer to see a couple of different examples, not only because it gives more fodder for the interview, but also because I love, HBS calls it, what they look for is a habit of leadership. And I think that they choose the word habit very deliberately. The way how I phrase it is, I think that they're looking for people who almost can't help themselves, but get involved and try to make things better. Because if you think about other usually habits can be bad. Some habits can be bad, like addictions, like smoking is a bad habit, or eating French fries every day is a bad habit. But you feel compelled to do it. Like you just can't. There's almost like an unconscious thing that's kind of like force. You before you even realize what's happening, you're eating that potato chip, or you're smoking the cigarette, or whatever it is. It's the same thing, but with leadership for HBS. So the other benefit of using multiple examples is that then if you do them over multiple time periods or different contexts, it can be the same time period. Let's say it's from the past 2 years, but it's like 2 different clients that you've worked with, where you've had very different situations with them that you've had to overcome or persuade them or something like that. Like I prefer multiple ones just because it shows that habit.
Okay, Maria, we're going to go for another 10 minutes, but there's another question here that says, what if I shoot the 900 word limit by 20 to 30 words?
I think
Would
it'll
that
be
hurt
fine.
it? Okay.
But I mean, they're not going to be like, oh, he went 20 words over. That's it. Automatic rejection. However, I would humbly argue that you can probably cut out those 20 to 30 words.
Okay,
I
great.
worry that it risks looking like you didn't put as much effort into the essay as you could have, because something like cutting out 20 words from a 900, 20 words out of a 920 word essay, it's not the good news is it's a small percentage. So the good news is it's not like an egregious, like, oh no, but on the other hand, personally, I would say, well, but it's a really small percentage. So you sure you can't cut that out? If at the end of the day, you're getting ready to hit that submit button and your essay is 920 words and you're like, Maria, the deadline is in 20 minutes, I need to submit, then go ahead. Absolutely. I think it's fine if you're 20 or 30 words over. But I would also argue that you can probably get it down.
Do we want to say anything else about the essay before we move on to the test scores and the recommendations?
I don't think so. I mean, I've got, in the lab, I've got like so many. I really dissect this. I really go into examples. So
yeah, you do.
If you want a lot more about it, like, you can check out my advice there. So let's move on with the time we have left. Let me see. I think test scores are pretty straightforward. The one thing I would point out to you guys is that they are not going to accept the new GMAT focus exam that is going to launch at some point later this year. Or I'm not a test prep person, so I have not been following the GMAT focus super closely.
So yeah, they will.
Okay. But so they're not going to, HBS does not accept it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are planning to prepare for the GMAT focus, realize that you will need to take some other test in addition to the GMAT focus to submit. The new GRE, by the way, is fair game because it's not a completely different test. It's a modified version of the existing test, but the GMAT focus is completely new. And so in the interest of being fair, HBS is super into being fair to all applicants. So for example, like if you were to take the GMAT, let's say the GMAT focus comes out, and just between us, let's be very blunt. Let's say it's easier than the current GMAT is. I have a feeling, I don't know if it's going to be dramatically easier, but it's probably going to be easier because GMAT's trying to get back that market share that they've lost to the GRE over the past several years. You don't get back market share by making the test harder. So let's say it's going to be easier. So now it's not like, because it hasn't launched in time for round 1 people to study for it, prepare for it, and take it, if someone applies in round 2 with a GMAT focus test and it's easier than the GMAT would have been, like, now how am I supposed to compare apples to apples, the candidates from round 1 and the candidates from round 2? That's my personal take on it. And I was really happy when I saw that this was HBS's policy, because in the interest of fairness, like, it's not fair if some candidates applying in the later round get access to this benefit or this advantage that the round 1 people aren't realistically going to have. So just a heads up. Some other business schools, by the way, are totally fine with the GMAT focus. Some schools even take the executive assessment exam, which is originally meant for executive MBA applicants, but I think Columbia and NYU both accept the executive assessment. So just the most important thing to mention here is, if you're planning on taking the GMAT focus, you'll need to take something else if you're applying to Harvard. All right.
I don't think we should ask Maria. Should I ask you any GMAT questions, or maybe not, because this is not a GMAT related session, right?
Yeah. I will say, I see very quickly. I jumped over. I was like, oh,
yeah.
I can go over.
It's okay. It's okay.
Someone's saying, does a good GMAT compensate for a moderate or bad GPA? Yes, it can. It's in fact the best way to compensate for a moderate or bad GPA. It might not completely forgive things, but it goes a long way because it is a standardized test, right? Earlier, I used the example of, like, what if I majored in something that's BS at Maria's, correspondence school versus I majored in chemical engineering at MIT. Obviously, the GPAs are going to be very different. But what's nice about the standardized tests is they are standardized, and those percentiles are across the entire test taker pool. So I love them. I think it helps a lot.
Maria, do we want to answer this question? Because I think in the age of AI, it's almost impossible not to have an AI question. Someone asked, using ChatGPT to reduce the essay, is that a bad idea?
So I think it's fine. So it's interesting, right? Because if we jump ahead to the fine print, they say statement of application authenticity. I state that everything in here is authored solely by me and not a third party, nor created by generative artificial intelligence or machine learning software. So if you wanted to interpret this as strictly as possible, I think that would mean that you don't use ChatGPT to reduce the word count. However, I think that if you're using it to take an existing essay from 920 words down to 900 words, you could almost argue that it's effectively like a Grammarly, or it's a souped up version of the spell checking software or the grammar checking software that has existed in Microsoft Word for 30 years. So, and it's interesting because I've been attending, I'm a member of this admissions consultants organization called AGAC that is like you have to be a certain level of admissions consultant to join. And we've been doing summer webinars with the schools, and we do an annual conference, and we were all at Columbia and Yale earlier this summer. And during both at the conference and during these webinars with the schools that they do like sort of just for us, some of them had said like, look, if you use ChatGPT to edit your stuff, like we see it as a tool, just like spell check. But what no school is cool with, and HBS is especially not cool with, is if you use ChatGPT to like create the original essay. And I'll tell you, resist that temptation, because ChatGPT can write well, but it does definitely, from what I've seen, because I've experimented with it a little, it's definitely dry.
Mistakes.
Yeah, it's sort of dry, and it doesn't
It's
sound,
dry.
it often doesn't sound like a real person. So please realize that I would like for you to write your essays as if though you were speaking, and not as if though you're writing like an essay that you would in college. So verily, this is not the context in which one should expound upon one's concepts with, like, no, don't talk like that in your essay, right? You're going to say like, I walked into the room and she said, what are you thinking? Right? Like that's going to be much more pleasant to read and much more engaging to read. And I don't know that ChatGPT can do that. So in my opinion, because I don't feel that like it wasn't created. Notice how they say it was not created. If I zoom in, can you see that? Like, so for me, if you take a 920 word essay and say, okay, cut 20 words out of this ChatGPT, I don't think that that's a violation of this, because it wasn't created, it was simply edited. So that's my take on it. But I would hesitate to do it because like ChatGPT might mess it up.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, a really good tip, Maria, that I used when I was writing my essays, I actually recorded myself as if I were speaking my story. And then I wrote everything I recorded, and then I started like narrowing down the parts and stuff. That helped a lot, because it's a lot easier for me, at least, to speak things than actually to write them. So that really helped me. So maybe that's a tip that would help other applicants. So I don't know. But
that's a great tip.
Yeah.
Guys, if you like that tip, everyone give a thumbs up, give a like to this video.
well, I don't own GMAT Club, but you can always, yeah.
I don't either, but I if it helps, if it helps with that algorithmic love, I'm all about the algorithmic love, and this, this is really good content. So yeah, please like it. And that way this video will...
Are we going to talk about the recommendations right now, just briefly, Maria?
Yeah, sure. So the only thing really, for recommendations, I actually sent myself the recommendation to pull it up. It is a fairly standard, most business schools have a fairly standard recommendation. This is a sort of a very minor thing, but when you are filling out your recommenders stuff, so you add a recommender, you're going to fill in all this information, and then here it's going to say, I waive my right to access this report. You do want to select, oops, I closed it. You do want to select, I waive my right to access the report. Oh, the little box I don't think it shows up on this one because it's a separate window. Anyway, when you click on to add a recommender, a separate little box is going to show up. And in that box...
No, it actually showed up, Maria.
Oh, it did. Oh, nice.
Yeah, it did.
So you do want to waive, it. Basically what that's saying is that if you get accepted, you're not going to then ask later to see your recommendation. You will technically, legally have the right to see your recommendation if you want to afterwards. However, in the interest of having the recommendation be one that is full of integrity and honesty, right? If I know that you might read my recommendation later, I might watch what I say, versus if that right has been waived as a recommender, I know that I can speak freely, as it were. And therefore that recommendation is worth a lot more, because I know as a reader, as an admissions reader, I know that it's sincere and not, the person isn't like watching what they're saying. Of course, the recommender is going to watch what they say, but like,
And your recommender should be someone you report to, right?
that's the best option is your current boss. However, that is not always possible. So in case that is not possible, then a previous boss, but preferably one that has been your boss within the past 6 months to 2 years, or someone else who is senior to you in the organization that has worked closely with you. They might not be your boss, they might be the head of another department, but maybe you work very closely with that other department on a regular basis, for example. And you may have to, this is something where I think if your boss is not your recommender, you may want to explain that, for example, in the additional information section, for example.
There is
So
definitely, yeah, a place to do that.
yeah, and anytime
Mhm.
that anytime an assumption might be made, you need to assume that they will make a negative assumption. So if you don't submit a recommendation from your current boss, the automatic knee-jerk assumption is what? That your boss doesn't like you. You don't get along with your boss. Therefore, you can't manage upwards. Therefore, your career options are going to be limited after business school. Therefore, you're not going to be the sort of alumnus that makes us proud. Like, you can see the dominoes falling. Now, a lot of times your boss, you can't have your boss because maybe your boss doesn't like you, which is okay, fine. But as long as somebody else likes you, that's cool. But maybe your company is doing layoffs, and if they know that you're not really committed to their company because you're thinking of skedaddling next year, they might lay you off, or they might not give you that promotion. So that happens all the time. And so don't
As
worry if
long
that's
as you
you.
explain it. Yeah, as
Yeah.
long as you explain it, right?
Yes. Otherwise, the negative assumption, just assume that their assumption will go as negative as possible, and try to mitigate that with an explanation.
Maria, I think you and I are having way too much fun with this, huh? We can stay here till midnight.
See, and they say applying to business school is painful. What? We're big party, man. Okay. So I don't think I need to walk through the only thing to really note about I think the recommendation for HBS is they do ask us very similar questions as other schools, but they have what might be a slightly smaller or shorter word count. So 300 words, 250 words. Sometimes the other schools will give you a little bit more space. However, if your recommender has written like a recommendation for other schools and it's like 400 words or it goes above, like I don't worry about it. If you can get your recommender to cut some words out, great. Please ask them. But if they're like, no, it's okay. It's fine, because you can try to control your recommender. It's again, because why is that good? Because it shows that you're able to manage upwards and you're able to influence people over whom you have no authority. However, if it's for whatever reason it doesn't happen, don't stress. You're not going to get like rejected because your recommender did something that didn't follow the instructions.
Maria, if I may add, for international applicants who have recommenders who don't speak English, I know that I've attended so many AdCom, like business school events, and the AdCom always says that the recommender can write in their own native language as long as they translate it in a, what is that called, official translation
You
or
would have
something,
to actually, yeah, you'd have to get a professional translator.
something like that, right?
To
But
translate it, yeah.
they can write your recommendations in their local language if they can't express it in English. So that's definitely something that they could do.
Yes, but you have to submit something in English. I mean, it's the question of if
Yes.
they don't write it
Mhm.
in English, you have to get someone else to, and it can't just be like your cousin. It has to be someone who's like an actual translator. That is,
Uh,
so actually keep that in mind, guys. If that is going to be part of the process, like you might want to ask your recommender to submit the recommendation to the translator like 2 weeks before the deadline, just to make sure that the translator's turnaround time is able to be enough.
Maria, a quick question from Antonia, and maybe we'll wrap up with this question. If my supervisor has gone on paternity leave 3 weeks ago, does that make him my previous manager?
It's fine. He's still employed by the company. Technically in the org chart, it's still your manager. It's fine. And even let's say he wasn't just temporary. Let's say he quit 3 weeks ago. That's still fine. You can just explain it. What happens is like, actually, if we go into the recommendation form, please provide a brief description of your interaction with the applicant, blah, blah, blah. So here's where your boss would say, like, up until 3 weeks ago, I was this person's boss. I had to leave because of whatever reason, but she reported to me for 2.5 years. And so I'm confident that, I can provide you the insight that you need. So that's not a problem. And it's close enough. In fact, actually, let's say you did have the situation where your boss left the company 3 weeks right before the deadline. I would almost rather have that person write your recommendation than your technical current, quote unquote, current boss who doesn't know you. Because then they're going to be like, well, I've known her for 3 weeks and she seems good. She hasn't set the place on fire yet. So, right. They're not going to have a lot of substance, anything valuable really to say about you with only 3 weeks. So in that case, I would actually prefer that it be someone who's known you for a long time and known you in a significant way.
Maria, should we wrap up here? Do you think?
I think we should. I think we should.
I think we should too. I mean, we had a plan to do this for an hour, and now we took a lot from your time, Maria. You're always generous with the GMAT Club. We really appreciate you, Maria. You're part of the family.
Yay! Oh, I don't have a GMAT Club T-shirt though. I noticed earlier that you had a little GMAT Club T-shirt.
Yeah. I mean, BB, if you're watching this, we need a T-shirt for Maria.
Yes.
But
even if I don't get one, thank you guys for letting me be here. And yeah, and again, if you found anything here valuable or useful, please give a like to this video so that way it gets the attention and the love it deserves from the YouTube algorithms. And if you like me and the advice that I give, I'm pretty no nonsense in my advice. And if you like the way I explain things, there's a lot more where that came from at applicantlab.com. For less than the cost of 1 hour of my time. Otherwise, you get everything, a whole library of everything. So
I would say, from personal experience, Applicant Lab is great. Like, definitely. See, they're already petitioning for you. They're saying, give her a T-shirt, BB. See, look at that. Give her a T-shirt.
Excellent. I like that. I like that habit of leadership. I like the habit of leadership that the person saying that has demonstrated.
Maria, you're awesome. We love you at the GMAT Club. People love you. Thank you very much for your help. This has been really helpful. And you know what? I'm really looking forward to hosting more sessions with you in the future where we can go over maybe 2 hours and do little workshops and,
Yeah. I think I'm doing a couple more of these in a couple weeks.
Okay.
But those aren't going to be as long just because it's not as like puzzle piece, like the application has to fit with the resume and the essay so nicely and tightly. That's not as important for other schools. So I will try to be shorter.
Maria,
famous last words.
Maria, look at everyone who's talking about getting you a T-shirt. Oh my God.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Well, if you like this video and then the video does well.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for attending the application walkthrough. Everyone who's here with us, we have more application walkthrough sessions. The link is posted in the chat box. Maria is available at Applicant Lab and at the GMAT Club as well. Maria, the last word is yours. Thank you very much on behalf of me and the GMAT Club and all of the GMAT Club fans. So the last word is yours.
I would just humbly ask that if you like me, you like my advice, please check out my product. It's very affordable and I think it's good. I wouldn't launch it if I thought it was terrible. So, absolutely. And it also, if you buy it, you can then also email support@applicantlab.com or I or someone on my team will get back to you for some of these little questions that we had along the way of well, my boss quit 3 weeks ago, whatever. If it's not covered in the lab, you can just email us and I or someone else will get back to you. So it's not, you're not just I'm by myself. It's a software tool and I'm in the wilderness alone. No, it's me checking the inbox.
You are you're never alone. You can reach out to Maria, reach out to me, reach out to GMAT Club. We're here to support you on your MBA journey. Thank you so much, Maria. You're great. Thank you. I love you. We love you. And I will see you very, very soon, Maria.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.